on this day in history, Chicago witnessed its deadliest maritime tragedy.
The SS Eastland capsized in the Chicago River.
Just a minute ago, historians uncovered chilling parallels between the SS Eastland and MV Sewol disasters. In the summer of 1915, excitement turned to tragedy when the SS Eastland capsized.
I was just shocked. It's an iconic scene. The Eastland capsized in the Chicago River.
A preventable disaster caused by prioritizing profit over safety. Nearly a century later, in 2014, the MV Sewol ferry faced a similar fate, revealing a haunting pattern of negligence in pursuit of financial gain. How can such devastating losses persist without driving meaningful change? Let's investigate the frightening consequences of these choices and uncover the urgent need for a change. The Chicago River's Eastland Disaster. One clear example is the SS Eastland disaster in Chicago in 1915. This ferry was built to take passengers across the Great Lakes and was known for being fast and efficient. But there was a problem from the start. The people who built it usually worked on cargo ships and didn't properly adjust their design for a passenger ferry. They made changes to the ship, like shortening it and adding another deck, which made it even more unstable. Despite these issues, no one stopped to check if it was still safe. On that fateful morning, a happy crowd got on the ship, not knowing the danger that awaited them. They had no idea that their excitement would soon turn into a disaster that would be remembered forever, leaving everyone asking, what happens when a ship meant to keep you safe becomes a deadly trap? While still tied to the dock on the Chicago River, the Eastland tipped over because it was overloaded and unsteady. Hundreds of people were trapped and lost their lives. It was a terrible reminder of why safety standards are so important. But this wasn't the worst part. Decades later, it seemed like no one had learned the lesson. In 2014, another ferry disaster happened under similar circumstances, and more lives were lost. These accidents show a disturbing pattern where companies continue to ignore safety in favor of making money, even though technology has advanced, and we should know better by now. It's a sobering thought that human life is still sometimes overlooked in the pursuit of profit. The ship was designed to move quickly, reaching speeds of about 20 knots. But there was a major problem from the very start. The ship was top-heavy, meaning it had trouble staying balanced. It would rock from side to side, which passengers might have found funny as they watched it struggle to dock. However, for the captain and crew, this was no laughing matter. They had to constantly manage the water in special tanks below the ship, trying to keep it stable. The main reason it was so unsteady was its design. The ship was long and tall, but not very wide, which made it fast but also made it easier to tip over. On top of that, not enough of the ship was below water. Usually, ships have about 60% of their hull underwater to stay balanced. But this one had even less than that, about 30% after its first season. This was done to make the ship faster by reducing the amount of drag or resistance it faced in the water. One naval engineer saw how bad things were during a trip in 1913. He quickly wrote to the harbor master, urging for changes to be made to the ship's structure before something terrible happened. But sadly, his warnings were ignored. Things only got worse after the Titanic disaster in 1912. New rules required ships to have enough lifeboats for all passengers, which meant the ship had to add more lifeboats to its top deck. This added even more weight to the already unstable upper part of the ship. A general manager from the Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company knew this was a big mistake. He warned that these changes could make the ship more likely to capsize. But this wasn't the worst part. Despite all these concerns, the ship's owners had to follow the new safety rules. They tried to argue that adding more lifeboats would actually make the ship more dangerous by increasing its risk of tipping over. In the early hours of the morning, it was docked at the Clark Street Bridge. Families were eagerly boarding, excited for a fun trip across Lake Michigan to attend a company picnic in Michigan City, Indiana. It seemed like the perfect start to a joyful day. However, beneath all the excitement, a serious safety problem was brewing. It had been fitted with extra lifeboats to meet new safety rules, but this made the ship heavier on top and harder to balance. Faced with government pressure and tough decisions, the ship's owners had two choices: either reduce the number of lifeboats and carry fewer passengers, losing money, or add even more lifeboats, allowing them to carry more passengers and make more money. Unfortunately, they chose the second option. putting profit before the safety of the people on board. As the morning went on, it started to lean noticeably to one side. The chief engineer, Erickson, tried to fix the problem by filling the opposite side's ballast tanks with water, a standard procedure to keep the ship balanced. Although the ship was already packed with passengers, likely more than the official limit of 2,570, more adjustments were made to balance out a new tilt. But the situation was getting worse. The gangway doors on one side were now dangerously close to the water. Meanwhile, the band on the ship played music, making it seem like everything was fine. But this was far from the truth. The passengers, unaware of the real danger, continued enjoying the morning. Then, disaster hit. The ship suddenly tipped sharply to one side, letting river water pour in through the open gangway doors. Panic spread as water rushed in, and the crew below deck scrambled to escape. Crew members and passengers tried to shift their weight to steady the ship, but the decks were slippery from the rain, making it impossible to move quickly. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. The ship leaned so far that heavy objects like the piano and refrigerator slid across the deck, hitting passengers along the way. Inside, dishes and glasses flew from tables, adding to the chaos as people tried to move through crowded stairways. And then, in just a few moments, the unthinkable happened. The ship completely rolled onto its side, flipping over in the Chicago River. Hundreds of passengers were trapped inside, while many others were thrown into the cold water. What began as a day full of hope and excitement turned into a tragedy. The disaster was a grim reminder of what can happen when safety is overlooked in favor of profit. This tragic event underscores a recurring theme of safety being sacrificed for financial gain, a pattern that, unfortunately, does not end here. Quiet disaster at the dock. In the middle of the day, without any loud noises or warnings, a ship suddenly tipped over in front of many people at the harbor and those watching from nearby buildings. Jack Woodford, one of the witnesses, described the moment in disbelief. He saw the large steamer slowly lean over, almost like a massive whale sinking into the water for a rest. It was hard for him to believe that such a big ship could turn over while it was securely tied to the dock, especially since the water was calm and the sky was clear. Jack even began to question if what he saw was real as the Eastland sank right there at the dock. As soon as the disaster struck, people from all around rushed to help. Bystanders, rescue teams, and even people from other boats worked together to save the victims. The rescue efforts were chaotic and heartbreaking. Rescuers broke windows to free people trapped inside the ship, while divers dove into the dark waters hoping to find survivors. The tragedy was enormous. 844 passengers and crew lost their lives, a number even higher than the Titanic disaster just 3 years earlier. Divers who went into the sunken ship soon realized they had a grim task ahead. The inside of the ship was like a confusing maze, with everything tilted on its side. Many of the victims were found near the main staircase, where people had become trapped in a deadly bottleneck, unable to escape. The news of the sinking spread quickly, grabbing headlines that blamed the ship's owners and builders. The naval engineer had warned about possible dangers with the Eastland as far back as 1913, and he shared this information with the media. This only fueled the public's anger as people demanded answers. If the risks were known, how could this disaster have been allowed to happen? They wanted to know why such a dangerous ship was still in use and why no one had stepped in to prevent the tragedy. As investigations began, it became clear that the safety standards for ships on the lakes were very poor. The designer of the ship admitted that the Eastland was originally designed to carry only 500 passengers. He claimed he didn't know it would be used for more than that. Even worse, no one had ever tested the ship's stability, even though it had already tipped over once during its launch before righting itself. People had mistakenly thought this meant the ship was safe, but this wasn't the worst part. In the end, 6 members of the St. Joseph Steamship Company were charged with conspiracy and negligence. However, the judge said there wasn't enough evidence to convict them. He argued that their actions were just standard business practices at the time. When the ship was sold in 1913, there had been no mention of its past issues or instability. One company executive admitted that he didn't know much about the ship, only that it was a good deal, and his job was simply to sign checks. The leaders of the St. Joseph Chicago Steamship Company were well known for avoiding any legal trouble. Instead of going to Illinois to face federal charges, They stayed in Michigan and managed to escape extradition. At one point, a judge even said that what they did was just part of their usual and ordinary business. But if these executives truly didn't know about the dangerous way their ship was behaving, leaning heavily from side to side by 10 to 15 degrees, then just looking at the ship should have been enough to raise alarm bells. On top of that, engineers reported that they had to move water in and out of tanks just to keep the ship stable, something that wouldn't have been necessary if the ship had been in good shape. The company claimed they cared about safety and even added more lifeboats to the ship. However, they never did the necessary tests to see if the ship was safe with the extra weight. Skipping these tests wasn't just careless, it was extremely irresponsible. And while they were never found guilty in court, the company's leaders blamed Erickson, the chief engineer, for the disaster. They said he mishandled the ballast tanks, and this accusation stuck even after he died in 1919. Incredibly, a court in 1933 still blamed him for the tragedy, even though they said the Eastland ship was in good condition on that terrible day, July 24, 1915. The Eastland disaster eliminated 844 people, yet it didn't lead to big changes in maritime safety rules. The ship and the victims were soon forgotten, and the company's executives were never held responsible. This tragedy served as a stark warning about what can happen when companies are allowed to operate without proper oversight or care for safety. But this wasn't the last time something like this happened. Almost 100 years later, another disaster was narrowly avoided. In 2012, Shanghai Jin Marine bought the MV Sewol, a passenger and car ferry, from a Japanese company. Despite the ship being old and heavily used, the new owners made big changes to it. They added more cabins for passengers and even an art gallery, all in an attempt to make more money. But these changes also affected the ship's weight and balance, making it less stable. Fortunately, unlike in the past, ships with big changes like this had to go through stability tests. The Korean Register of Shipping checked the seal and found that while the changes made the ship less stable, it was still safe to sail as long as they followed new rules. This case shows how far safety standards have come and why it's so important to follow these rules to avoid another catastrophe. As the ship leaned over because of its heavy load, the ropes holding the cargo snapped. The cargo, now loose, slid all to one side, making the ship tilt even more. Panic quickly spread among the passengers and crew as the ship struggled against the water, now leaning dangerously to one side. This tragic tale sets the stage for the next chapter, exploring how similar catastrophes shaped maritime safety standards worldwide. Fery Se's overloaded journey. The Fery Se was not built for such a difficult trip. The ship had already been questioned for its safety after being changed to carry more weight than it was designed for. But even with these concerns, the ferry operators, who were eager to carry as much as possible, gave incorrect data to the Korean Register of Shipping. This false information made it seem like the ship was lighter than it really was, and that it could safely carry more. As a result, a key safety test, which checks if the ship is balanced, was done using the wrong numbers, and the changes to the ship were approved when they shouldn't have been. But that wasn't the worst part. After these checks were finished, a company called Shanghai Jin Marine added an extra 30 tons of marble to the ship without telling anyone. This extra weight wasn't included in the final approved plans for the ferry, making it even more unstable and dangerous. The ferry ran on the Incheon-Jeju route, and soon people began to notice problems. Crew members and dock workers saw the ship tilt dangerously when loading and unloading cargo. Despite these warnings, the ferry company ignored them, putting profit ahead of safety. Things came to a head on April 15, 2014. On that day, SE was set to carry 466 people, including 325 high school students, on a field trip. The ferry was overloaded with over 2,200 tons of cargo, far more than its limit of 1,770 tons. To make things worse, the ballast, which helps keep the ship stable, was only filled to 43% of what it should have been. When the ferry left the dock, it looked fine in the water, fooling inspectors who didn't realize the ship was dangerously overloaded. They only checked the ship's waterline, which seemed normal because the ballast tanks had been partially emptied. Little did they know, this mistake was setting up a disaster. But this wasn't the last mistake. Shortly after leaving, the ferry, weighed down by the heavy and badly secured cargo, made some turns. One critical steering move caused the ship to tilt sharply. Normally, a ship would balance itself after such a turn, but SE, overloaded and missing enough ballast, kept tilting. The forces that should have stabilized the ferry couldn't handle the load, and the ship began to capsize. As the ferry leaned over further, chaos broke out. The loose cargo shifted violently again, making the ferry even more unbalanced. This tragic accident wasn't just about poor operations. It was a result of serious oversight failures and a lack of care for the safety of everyone on board. As the cargo on the ship shifted suddenly, boxes and crates slid wildly across the decks, piling up against the walls on the left side of the ship. This caused a dangerous imbalance. The ship started leaning heavily to the left, creating a serious problem. Despite the situation, some curious passengers went up to the decks, even though the ship's announcement system kept asking everyone to stay still and remain in their rooms. Most people listened and went back to their cabins. Among the passengers were high school students who, instead of being alarmed, started live streaming what was happening, making jokes about how it looked like scenes from the movie Titanic. One high school student was the first to make a real emergency call. Sadly, he didn't survive the disaster. As the situation got worse, the ship tilted even more until it was completely on its side and began sinking. By the time it was over, the ship was almost completely underwater, with just the tip of the front sticking out of the ocean. Out of everyone on board, only 172 people survived the tragic accident. This disaster led to serious consequences for those responsible. Unlike past shipwrecks, the captain and crew, who were in charge of keeping the ship safe, were held legally accountable. The captain was sentenced to life in prison, the chief engineer was given 10 years, and 13 other crew members were also jailed. But this wasn't the worst part. The disaster was mainly caused by the ship's owners, Chong Hai-jin, who had faked documents and made illegal changes to the ship, showing a shocking level of carelessness. Even though the crew faced severe punishment, the owners didn't face as harsh a penalty. The chief executive officer was sentenced to only 10 years. After the disaster, the company's license to operate ferries was taken away, and Chonghaejin Marine went out of business. This tragic event highlighted important lessons about ship safety, lessons that have been learned over centuries and often come at the cost of many lives. The rules and regulations for maritime safety exist for a reason, and when ship owners or companies ignore them to make more money, terrible accidents like this can happen. The sinking of the ship serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of following these safety rules, so future tragedies can be avoided. Should businesses that repeatedly ignore safety standards in pursuit of profit face more severe penalties than they currently do? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more thought-provoking discussions.